Aloha. I'm jumping on here to talk a little bit about how I personally use the gene keys and the animal totem index and how they signify to me that I've moved through certain phases in my evolution. So about a month and a half ago, I was down on the river with some friends, and we were hopping from hot spring to hot spring. There's a whole bunch of hot springs that line the Colorado River just south of the Hoover Dam, and we were on some jet skis doing some hot spring hopping. All right. And we had stopped at one in particular that you have to walk along the base of the cliff, basically. There's not much of a shore. And eventually kind of crawl up and around. Gosh, it's not really the mountain, but it's the cliff, basically. You have to climb up and around the cliff. And there's water dripping off the side of this cliff, and so it's very lush. Whereas all the rest of the canyon is just desert. And as we rounded a corner, I saw a spider. Not sure if it was a recluse or a baby tarantula, but it was pretty big, you know. It would have filled up my entire lens of my glasses if it was set on top of it. And I was in such a calm and collected space that when I saw this spider, I was just filled with a reverence and respect for it, and no fear. I saw it for what it was. I recognized that thing could definitely hurt if I made it mad and it bit me. But it was just peacefully sitting there on the wall, on the damp wall. And so I just kind of looked over to my two friends and called out to them, letting them know, hey, be aware, there is this large spider here. Doesn't seem harmful to me. It didn't even react by my noisily scrambling around the bend. And my friend, when she saw the spider, she reacted by screaming and going, ah! A typical response by many people when they see spiders. Ah! And every time she screamed, this spider recoiled on the wall that it was resting upon. Visibly, very visibly, just every single time. The spider didn't react at all to my talking or the third person's talking, but it reacted every single time to my one friend screaming in terror. And I tried to point out to her, hey, calm yourself down. This spider isn't even reacting to me, but it's clearly reacting to your screams and your fear. And nothing became of that. We went up into this particular hot spring, had some fun, eventually went back to our camp by the main hot spring. And so later that evening, while I was just melting in the main hot spring, in my relaxed meditation, just sitting in that hot spring, just visions of spiders came to me, and I was just in so much awe of them and how beautiful they are, and just how lovely they are, and as another friend reminded me, how industrious so many of them are. Particularly the tarantula isn't known for webs, but in general, the more iconic spiders do build these beautifully spun webs, and many of them will spin their intricate and complex webs every single day. There's so many of them that will spin the web and at the end of the day eat it and then rebuild it the next day. It's just really remarkable. And so the spider is associated with the 50th gene key, and it's considered the shadow guardian or fear guardian. And that shadow is the shadow of corruption. And I'm not going to go too detailed into these particular gene keys themselves. I'm just going to relate to how I use it. But to me, this really signified that I had really faced a lot of my issues with corruption, and I had uncorrupted my own self in many ways. And the example used to keep a lot of bias out of the understanding and interpretation of the word is to think of it as data corruption. When copying files from a CD or a disk, the same thing. When copying files from anywhere, it's referring to how information can be copied incorrectly, and that alone is corruption. And so it's basically just misinterpreting information that's coming in and saving it wrong. Thus, that's corruption. So to me, that really means that I was no longer taking in information incorrectly. I was no longer saving information incorrectly. And I was moving into the gift state, which is equilibrium. And I believe the city is harmony, but don't quote me on that. I actually did not double check that before making this. This was spur of the moment. And so last night, and into this morning, I had a dream. I was dreaming some pretty interesting things about pesticides. I recently threw away I don't know how many years I had it in the back of my closet. I recently threw away an almost full jug of bug spray after it had been sitting in my closet for years, because I've just decided that I'm not going to spread that poison. And so, without going too deeply into the dream, I had ingested an entire bottle of pesticide, and then I vomited it in the dream, and I woke up. I woke up because I sensed something in the room with me. And I had just barely opened my eyes, and I noticed this little black, it almost looked like a little black caterpillar. A lot of time, very well, because it was dark, I was half asleep, and I wasn't wearing my glasses, so I couldn't really see what it was. But to me, it looked like a dark little black caterpillar, hairy, and I saw it, and I sensed it, and it ran from my sheet cover across my arm and then away off of my bed. And when it ran across my arm, oh boy, I certainly do not enjoy the feeling of having little bugs scurry over me. It is certainly not pleasant. And so I had a frightened and grossed out reaction. But in the process of watching it do this movement, I also came to realize that that was not a caterpillar. That would have been a cockroach. And so, to my recollection, this is probably the first cockroach I've even noticed in my house. I'll give it a conservative 4 years. And it's probably been about 4 years since, if not more, since I've done the bug spray. And so I find that kind of interesting, particularly because I was just having this dream of consuming a bottle of bug spray and then vomiting it right before being awoken by this bug. And So I feel like I've moved into my next lesson, which I'll get into in a moment, which is going to be the 31st gene key, since the shadow guardian is the cockroach. But I see a pattern, because I remember when I was around 10, we had just taken the bunk bed out of the garage and reassembled it so that I could sleep on the bunk bed, and I slept on the top bunk. And I had just woken up in the middle of the night to feel something creeping and crawling over my leg, and turned out to be a spider, and I whacked it off my leg, and that really creeped me out. And I don't think I slept on the top bunk of that bed for a long time. But it's interesting how these patterns repeat. But I am grateful that I no longer have the fear that I once did of the spider. And while I'm not afraid of cockroaches, they immensely gross me out. And I lived in Hawaii for years. And I lived in the college dorms. And one year in particular, we had a dorm that was heavily infested with cockroaches. And I just remember I had a case of paper, and I ended up having to throw half of it away because the roaches ate part of the paper and they would poop all over it. Some of the people in Hawaii, whether it's because of their accent or not, they call them cockroaches, because when you have them, they put caca everywhere. So, gosh, yes, they gross me out a lot. And I can absolutely see how arrogance, which is the shadow of the 31st gene key, I can see how arrogance is sprinkled all over my life right now. So I'm really grateful to have the gene keys to help me through my lessons. And thank you for listening while I relayed my personal, one of the ways that I personally use the gene keys in conjunction with my personal growth. Thank you.